Today, we're joined by Washington, D.C. attorney who happens to also be a member of the D.C. Police Reform Commission and also the executive director of D.C. Justice Lab. Welcome in, Patrice Sultan. Thanks for joining us, Patrice.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for caring so much about these issues.
Oh, absolutely, without question. So let's first talk about DC Justice Lab. So as far as I understand it, the organization, it's comprised of law and police experts who develop strategies and solutions for really making sweeping change to the district's criminal legal system. But can you really put that into concrete terms so that our viewers understand what DC Justice Lab efforts are?
Yes, so we're a criminal justice policy shop in DC focused on DC. And what sets us apart is really the degree to which we're trying to change our criminal legal systems here. We're talking about monumental changes from the start of the system to the end of the system.
And I know you say from start to end. What does that kind of thing entail in terms of like those concrete measures that you are making changes for?
Yeah, so the things that we're fighting for hardest right now include placing severe limits on police authority in the district, fully overhauling all of our criminal laws and penalties, and abolishing the use of solitary confinement and other torture chambers in our local jail.
And okay, so I don't fully appreciate why solitary confinement might be so opposed to, but can you speak to why that is something that we do not want to continue on in our criminal justice system?
Absolutely. Our local Department of Corrections uses what they call safe cells. A person is stripped fully naked. The lights are on full brightness 24 hours a day. They don't have access to running water. And sometimes people are there for months at a time without access to visitors. And they don't even know what day it is. The use of solitary confinement has exploded during the pandemic in facilities all over the country because people are using it as a substitute for medical isolation. And a lot of people have been in medical lockdown and confined to their own cells for as much as 23 hours a day.
Oh my God, that's really jarring to hear, because even it's just the thought of the lights being on full bright, because having been in a number of studios just doing this TV work, the thought of being subjected to those lights at all point in time, that's wild. And so this isn't considered like an Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment, offense?
Well, most facilities across the country, unfortunately, still use solitary confinement. There is a national effort to end the practice called Unlock the Box. And I'm hoping that DC won't be the only place to make efforts to reform this in the new year.
Wow, well, thank you for enlightening us to that, Patrice, because I was completely unaware that goes on. And I know DC is currently, it has the highest incarceration rates, yet one of the lowest ranked criminal codes and one of the most racially imbalanced systems of justice in the United States. And I know you spent the last 2 years rewriting the criminal code in response to these infirmities. So kind of what was that experience like?
Yes, DC is in the process of rewriting its entire criminal code. I was very lucky to be a part of that process leading up to the launch of DC Justice Lab, and it's something that a lot of states should do. DC's criminal code hasn't been rewritten in full since 1901, and that's true in a lot of states. The best we've seen is some states in the 60s and 70s adopted a model penal code, but as you know, our values have changed a lot since then, right? The model penal code from the 60s and 70s, for example, has a marital exception to rape. That didn't actually change nationwide until 1993. So it's time for us to really revisit our values and design codes that reflect them.
Oh, absolutely, without question, especially if these are going to be governing how we live and interact as people. And I know also in DC that nearly 90% of people incarcerated in local jails are Black. Although Blacks only account for about 45% of the city's population. And this is really just a reflection of the inequities that are within our society. So how do you think the justice system can be changed to reduce these inequities?
Yeah, that is true across the board in our system. It's 90% Black when you look at who's being surveilled, who's being policed, who's being stopped, arrested, prosecuted, incarcerated. And I think what we have to do is start talking about the hard cases. It's somewhat easy to talk about nonviolent offenses, drug offenses, juvenile delinquency. But if we're serious about reversing mass incarceration, we have to start talking about violent crime, gun crime, sex crime, and young adult offenders, or people who have committed offenses as young adults, I should say.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I just think that, those are the harder cases to talk about. And the reason that we have mass incarceration isn't just the number of people that we have in prisons, it's that we're keeping people there for way too long without any opportunity to earn their way home.
Yeah, and absolutely. And as we're seeing more individuals be exonerated, also we learn of these stories of people being housed for so long without necessarily having the due process that they deserve. It makes us really relook at our justice system, which is important. And I know that the DC Council, it's really on the verge of releasing offenders under this Second Look Amendment Act. And if this act is passed, people who committed crimes before the age of 25 can ask a judge for early release once they've served 15 years of their sentence. And I understand also that you advocated for this bill, and I want to know why.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we were a member of a coalition called Thrive Under 25. And when you think about sentencing, of course, a judge can't see 15, 30, 50 years into the future to see who the person they're sentencing is going to grow into in adulthood, or to see what we're going to look like as a society at that point in time. So what this bill does is it gives the court an opportunity to look again at that person's sentence, and it gives the person an incentive to create a record, establish a record for why they should get to go home.
And that's really cool, especially because it creates ways to open change, because after you've been confined for a nice period of time, you have a lot of time to think, but also to grow, especially if you committed offense as a younger person. So making way for that and taking advantage of that is a good thing. Do you think that this is something that will pass in the district?
It passed our city council. We have an extra hurdle because we don't have statehood yet. But what I'm really hoping is that it will catch on other places. This is the first jurisdiction to pass a law like this.
That is very cool. And I also know that you and I are friends, and we are former law school classmates and chums. And you are a staunch prison abolitionist. And we've gone back and forth in DMs and Twitter, because I am Princess Punish these mofos. So help me and the other viewers like me understand what the prison abolitionist movement is about and why we need it.
Sure. So first, I think we have more in common than we do differences on this point. When I say that I'm an abolitionist, what I mean is that I really want to live in a world where we don't have to rely on police and prisons as the salvation for all of our social harms. I want to live somewhere that we have put the social supports in place to prevent crime and to address conflict without relying on those very violent interventions, as I described earlier. Do I think we're there yet? No, there is a lot of building that we have to do as we tear down, but I think it's a really worthy goal. And I know that where we agree is that our current system is much too big, much too black, much too expensive for us to continue on the path that we're on now. And I'm hoping that people will continue to join this movement that's really, really had a groundswell this year to rethink our carceral systems and how we punish and who we punish.
And the thing is, I won't fight you on that, because I realize that most of my mentality comes from retribution. I'm very, very well aware of my limitations, and I actually think that you're right, because you're just far more level-headed than me when it comes to this. Well, hey, I recognize when I have emotions in play. And so I make these decisions actually very well. But I guess we only have a few minutes left, but if you can tell us kind of, how do you think we can reach that point where we can make the change that we need to? What are these things that we need to put in play to make this abolitionist movement? Because in part, I do completely 100% agree that this is a capitalistic function, this prison system. So let's stop it while we can. And I'd still like to punish people when they act up, but I guess however we need to get here, let's get here.
Yeah, well, let's talk about policing. We have so much energy around the very sort of front end of policing, who we recruit, how we train them, and the back end, how do we oversee policing and how do we discipline officers. But we should really be placing severe limits on their authority in the first place and legislating when can they make pedestrian stops, traffic stops, when can they execute search warrants, and really thinking about where we want police to serve a role in our communities.
Yes. Oh, policing, that is its own can of worms. But thank you so much for joining us, Patrice. We really appreciate it. Can you tell the viewers where they can find you?
Yes, thank you. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at DC Justice Lab. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.